on Gmail. If you want to send us an email, and a lot of people do, find us or email us at thinkingsidewayspodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, so find us, friend us, like us. And we have a group out there, too. If you're listening to us on Stitcher, well, you're probably not hearing this because are they still truncating our episodes?
No, I think it's getting better.
I think we've gotten to the bottom of what was going on.
Okay, good. Apologies, folks, but it's not our fault. It's Stitcher's fault. But you can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on Twitter, where our handle is Thinking Sideways. Not thinking, but Thinking Sideways. You can also find us on iTunes.
You probably found us on iTunes
and
already.
He probably did find us on iTunes. If you're on iTunes and you're downloading our stuff off of iTunes, yeah, that's great. But it'd be great if you could stop and leave us a comment and a rating. We really like those.
No, keep downloading, but also...
And also keep downloading. Yeah, sorry. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's it. Any last theories from you guys?
No.
Okay.
I'm out.
Well, okay, I am out too. So, all right, folks. So, for Thinking Sideways podcast...
We'll talk to you next week.
We'll talk to you next week. Over
we
and
out.
Yeah. Bye.
This episode of Thinking Sideways is not brought to you by Equal Pay for Chupacabras. Instead, it's brought to you by us. Or maybe you. You've heard me read ads for brands before like Bombas, Socks, Zola.com, and Breakout Games. All amazing companies that I truly believe in. These ads are great because they keep the show free for you and introduce listeners to new products you'll love. It's a win for everyone, and I'm happy to have the help and expertise of Midroll Media to ensure that the show continues to have great advertisers. If you're interested in advertising with our show, go to midroll.com/sideways and click Contact to let the folks at Midroll know. They also represent great shows like Generation Y and My Favorite Murders, so you can reach an array of engaged listeners. That's Midroll, midroll.com/sideways. You know how to spell sideways.
Thinking Sideways. Well, hi there. Welcome to another episode of Thinking Sideways. I'm your host, Joe, joined as always by
Steve
and
Your other host, Devin.
Yeah, the usual
Joe's
people.
not the only host.
Yeah.
He's the host this week.
Yeah, I guess
I'll let it slide.
All right.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Okay. Well, I guess you know what's really going on in the back of my head, huh?
He's been reading about this story too long.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Well, here we go. Yeah, I totally want to seize the podcast all for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This week we're going to talk about a fun disappearance that a lot of people think was a murder. And that's a guy in Australia named Bob Chappell. His name is spelled Chappelle, but it's pronounced Chappell, apparently. He disappeared January 26, 2009 in West Hobart, Australia, which is in Tasmania, which, if you don't know, is an island off the south coast of the Australian mainland. It's part of Australia. And the story was suggested by our listeners, Lucille and Renee, who no doubt are Tasmanian themselves, because this story, as it turns out, is a really big deal in Tasmania, and actually Australia in general.
Oh, yeah.
Even though a lot of Americans maybe have not heard of it, but it's big down there.
Now you will have.
And it is ongoing. Yeah, now you're going to know all about this story. America, Europe, Pakistan, you name it. So Bob Chappell, when he went missing in 2009, Bob was living with a woman named Sue Neal Fraser, who is now in prison for murder. And Bob and Sue had been together about 18 years when Bob disappeared. And according to some people, well, the fun had gone out of the relationship. Yeah.
That does tend to happen to a lot of relationships.
It does happen, yes. But that, of course, made her kind of a good candidate as a suspect for murder.
Yeah.
Typically, it's not unusual, right? But like I said, a ton of people in Tasmania think she's innocent and that her conviction for Bob's murder was a huge miscarriage of justice. And there's a big campaign going on to find information to exonerate Sue with all kinds of court appeals, one of which just happened.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact. And if you go out and look, you'll see that billboard that's got that picture of Sue, and it says reward $40,000 for information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Proving the innocence of Sue Neal Fraser. Yeah. Anyway, we'll talk about how the whole appeal thing played out here, but let me give you a little more background first.
So this kind of violates our 5-year rule, but kind of not.
It's over 5 years, but I picked the story and everything, and then after I go out to do my research, I suddenly realized, all this new stuff happened, and whenever you do a search, all these new links pop up.
Yeah.
And
Technically, he's over the limit, but luckily, nothing conclusive came about.
Yeah.
Which is why we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so who knows? I mean, maybe she's still in prison now, but who knows? Maybe somebody will spring her one of these days. Or she'll finish her sentence and just get out of prison.
With our luck, like 2 days before we drop this episode.
Yeah, really. And then
Prove conclusively.
Somebody will confess. Well, anyway, back to the beginning here. Bob and Sue were both divorced with kids. I think he had 3, she had 2, and I think the kids were grown by the time this happened.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, Bob and Sue had been a thing for about 18 years when Bob finally shuffled off the stage. And I'm putting it that way because actually nobody really knows what happened to Bob.
Nope.
No, he just vanished. Everybody assumes he's dead, which includes the police, the courts, his family, friends. Yeah.
But maybe not.
But no body was ever found. So there's actually not 100% rock solid.
There's actually
Bob is
a
dead.
very big void in evidence for what the heck happened to him.
Well, yeah, interestingly enough, no body was found, no murder weapon was found.
Right.
Yeah, I know. And so it's interesting that police managed to get a conviction out of this whole thing.
Agreed.
Yeah, but in 2008, just months before this happened, Sue and Bob bought themselves a nice big boat, a 53-foot ketch called the Four Winds, which actually I've seen photos of it. It's really nice.
Yeah.
What's a catch?
A ketch is it's a 2-masted sailboat, but it's the tall mast is in front and the short mast is in the rear of the boat, the stern.
Cool.
That's a ketch. And there's also the yawl, which is a similar rig, but a yawl. The aft mast is stepped a little further back and it's smaller.
Okay.
So there's the difference.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, everybody in podcast land couldn't see Joe's defining hand gestures.
Yeah, I was
so
making hand gestures at Devin.
He was also looking very concerned at me, like, I'm concerned you don't understand this already.
How could you not know what this is?
I mean, you're about to buy a boat.
All right,
It's true.
And actually, okay, for the sailing purists out there, the distinction between a ketch and a yawl is the yawl, the mast is stepped behind the steering station, and the ketch is stepped in front of the steering station.
Okay.
You're just showing off now.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's how you tell the difference between the two. Okay. But they bought it in Queensland, which is on the northeast coast of Australia, quite a ways from Tasmania. And they had ideas for the boat about retiring, doing a lot of sailing. They were planning maybe a dream trip of sailing around Australia. But alas, fate intervened. They never took that trip. When they were in Queensland, after they bought the boat, they hired 2 crew members to help them sail to Hobart. And their names were Peter Stevenson and David Casson.
And presumably that's because they were unfamiliar with the boat, and these guys...
They had some sailing experience. I know Sue at least had owned a fairly decent-sized sailboat previously, and I think, and so presumably, and that was while they were together, so presumably he picked up a lot of experience sailing on that. And,
right.
And so
but I'm guessing it was kind of a you-know-better, and this is a bit of a training run for us.
Yeah, well,
idea.
probably. Yeah, I don't know how big the previous boat was. Obviously, a 53-foot ketch is kind of bigger and harder to handle than a little 26-foot sloop or something like that.
And, if it's been a couple years,
or maybe they just wanted a couple of extra hands so they could actually catch some sleep.
Also possible.
Yeah.
It could be. That would definitely make for some lighter work.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they hired these 2 guys, and then unfortunately Bob had a few medical issues and wound up checking into the hospital for a little bit, and he decided to fly back to Hobart while Sue and the crew sailed the boat back. And as for Hobart, it is on the southeast coast of Tasmania, on what's called the River Derwent, and I'm no doubt mispronouncing that.
Probably.
Maybe the Australians call it the Darwin or something like that, or the Darwin, or I don't know. Somebody send me an email.
The doorstop, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And where Hobart is, it's on the River Derwent, but it's kind of more of a big inlet there. It's huge. It's wide. Yeah,
Okay.
It's near the sea.
Yeah.
Where they had it anchored is off Battery Point in Hobart, in the river, on the west side of the river. And, of course, when they bought the boat, it had a few issues, which is not a surprise. Boats usually do.
And it was a used boat, right?
It was a used boat, yeah.
Yeah,
So
boats are holes in the water that you throw money in.
Oh, hell yeah. And it could have been one of the things that placed a little strain on their relationship. They do that. And I know, Steve, you're going through like a little project right now that's placing a little strain on yours.
Yes. And it is a little project, but it has turned into a big project.
As they all do.
Yes, don't
they
remodel
do.
your home. It's a bad idea. Just buy a new one.
Yep.
Just throw that one in the
Just
garbage.
burn the old one and start over.
Insurance money's great for that.
Yeah, just sell it and buy something.
Yeah.
But the boat had some work done before leaving Queensland, and then, of course, after getting in Hobart, it needed some more work done. And, of course, on the last day that he was seen, Bob Chappell was on the Four Winds working on the boat, or at least that's what he said to Sue.
Well, and of course, if it needed work, then it would make sense that you would just go and work on the boat.
Yeah.
If you got the time and you want to retire on it,
yeah, exactly.
you don't think around about it.
Yeah, and besides, which this is your dream boat, you want to get the thing all ship shape, no pun intended, and then have it all ready to go.
Yeah.
So you got to get that stuff taken care of.
Yep.
And so Bob was working away, and on the morning of 26th January, Sue visited Bob on the yacht. Left late morning to go to have lunch with a friend. Turns out the friend was his daughter, Bob's daughter,
Okay.
Carolyn Ann Sanchez. I think she goes by Ann.
Okay. And sorry, Sue was going to have lunch with her?
Sue
Okay.
went to have lunch with her.
Okay.
And they met at the Royal Yacht Club, which is actually right where it was anchored anyway. It was anchored offshore. I assume they didn't have a slip at the Royal Yacht Club, even though I think they were members and had privileges, but it looks like it's all full. If you look at the aerials, it's all full, and there's literally dozens of yachts anchored offshore from it. So I assume there's a waiting list to get into the Royal Yacht Club.
I wouldn't be shocked by that.
That's why they had their boat moored out way out in the river
In the
instead
cheap
of,
seats.
Yeah, instead of on a slip. Yeah. During this lunch, Ann Sanchez took a photo which was later used as evidence against Sue. We'll hear about that later. Then later on, about mid-afternoon, she returned to the boat. And she told police that she had an argument with Bob, and Bob told her he wanted to stay on the yacht overnight, so she took the dinghy. And the dinghy, by the way, was an inflatable craft, kind of like a Zodiac.
Big rubber boat.
Big rubber boat. It's kind of
with a motor.
The pontoons. It's got the flat transom in the back, and it had an outboard on it. So she takes the dinghy back to shore, which left Bob stranded on the yacht overnight. And this was the last time that Sue saw Bob, at least as far as
Potentially.
yeah, potentially, maybe, yeah. And she was questioned later and told police about leaving him stranded on the yacht. And she said that she thought it was safer to leave Bob on the yacht without the dinghy because she said he was not actually good at getting in and out of it on his own. And apparently she was worried he might screw up and fall into the water and drown. I don't know.
Well, was that because he was just kind of clumsy at it, or is it because of like a medical issue? Because he'd had the medical issues that prevented him from, coming from with the boat home. So
I'd never heard it said exactly why it was she was concerned about his abilities for getting in and out of it.
I wondered it as I did all the reading and couldn't figure it out. So, okay.
Yeah.
Presumably because they'd been married 18 years and she knew that dudes
together.
are...
Not married.
That they had been together for 18 years and that she kind of thought, well, he's kind of an idiot.
He fell in the water 19 times.
Yeah.
And I hate him.
And I despise him. So he was just incompetent.
He's just
as
so
always,
dumb.
Everything. But and of course, some people contradicted that. There were other people who said, no, we saw him get in and out of it all the time off the yacht, and he had no problem at all doing it.
It was only when Sue was around drugging him that he had a hard time.
Maybe that was it.
It's crazy.
Yeah. When Sue got back to shore from her visit with Bob on the boat, she tied the dinghy to a ladder at the Royal Yacht Club. She said she tied it her usual way with 3 knots. I don't know what those 3 knots were, but she said that it had never come undone before.
So, of course, it came undone.
Naturally.
Yep.
Of course, yeah.
Surprise.
Would of course have it.
Yeah, so it comes undone overnight, or somebody untied it. The evidence indicates actually that somebody did untie it, because the painter, how sailors are, they got to call everything a different name. So that
it's like the Eskimos with 700 names for ice.
Yeah, I know, and 337 for snow.
Yes.
Damn.
But anyway, so what do sailors call that?
The painter, which is the rope that's tied to the front of the boat that you tie to the dock with. And it was found inside the dinghy and not trailing in the water as it would have been if the knot had come undone. So somebody undid those knots
and tossed it in the boat.
And tossed the rope in the boat, or sometime overnight.
Someone who was bad at staging things.
Yeah, apparently. At 5:40 a.m. the next morning, that would be January 27th, an unnamed person, I'm sure if I'd read through 300 articles, I could have found this guy's name.
I don't know that it matters, though.
No, not really. But somebody found the dinghy bobbing against the rocks, untied. He secured it and then headed out into the water in a boat with somebody else, who also, I don't have his name. And they happened to pass nearby the Four Winds, and they noticed that it was very low in the water.
Convenient.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is probably a stupid question, but do the dinghies usually have the name of the ship that they're associated, or the boat they're associated with on them?
It depends on how much money and how and how big the boat is and everything like this. So if the dinghy is big enough, obviously the bigger the yacht, the bigger the dinghy,
right?
Right? And that is when it gets to a certain point.
Wait, are you talking about the owner or the thing that floats in the water away from
yeah. Good point. But But yeah, typically, I mean, the larger boats, a lot of them do they're labeled one way or another.
But this one, was it labeled?
No, I've seen pictures of this one, and I have not seen it. But typically, I don't think people paint the boat name on an inflatable raft anyway.
Well, Sharpie or something, just so you know who's whose, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Mean, I'm sorry, I just think there's probably a lot of dinghies on,
That's a good point. You would expect everybody to just know which one is theirs. I
guess.
think, and
but mine would have Sharpie on it.
Yeah. But this one, I've seen a few pictures of it, and I saw no signs of any labeling whatsoever, other than the brand name that was on the side of it.
So they just happened to pass by the Four Winds.
But yeah, these guys happened to pass by the Four Winds. They noticed it's really low in the water, alarmingly low. So they stopped, climbed aboard, noticed there was a little bit of blood and a few things like a bloody knife, a few things like that laying around. So they called the police. The police phoned Sue at Bob and Sue's house at 7:11 a.m. on January 27th. That told her they'd gotten a report that their boat was sinking. So Sue gets in the car and heads down to the Royal Yacht Club. And when she shows up and police showed up and boarded the Four Winds, they noticed some clues. Blood on the steps leading down into the salon, a knife on the floor of the wheelhouse, a flashlight with blood on it. But no Bob. Bob was gone.
Okay.
Of course, the boat was still low in the water and sinking because it turns out that a pipe to the forward head had been cut. It was a plastic pipe. Mm-hmm. So, nautical toilets they don't use good water to flush the toilet. They just bring in water from outside to flush the toilet. And so somebody cut that pipe, which let water into the boat.
So it's an intake line that is now bleeding into the interior of the boat.
Yeah. And also, it turns out there was a seacock that was underneath the flooring in the forward part of the boat. I should say the bow. It had been opened also. And what's a
seacock?
Seacock is just a
plug. It's like the plug in your bathtub?
Yeah.
Basically, it's that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, we're just using a lot of boaty terms, and I feel like our listeners, some of them know boaty terms, but...
Very good point. No, the seacock is there. I mean, normally it would seem like kind of a dangerous thing to have, but when you haul the boat out of the water and you've got water in the bilges, it's nice to be able to open something up and drain the bilges. Yeah.
Because water is really heavy.
Yeah.
It is very heavy, yeah.
And pulling a boat out of the water full of water will actually make it tear itself apart.
Oh, yeah.
It's not meant to sustain the water in that way.
Yeah, it can be kind of hard on things, yeah. Oh, and also last of all, the bilge pump had been shut off.
Okay.
Yeah, and
so the one means to pump that water back out has now been defaulted.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So somebody obviously had sabotaged the boat, right?
Yeah.
Looks that way to me anyway. At some point, the first time Sue was on the boat with the police, I don't know if she was with them the first time they boarded it or maybe later in the day, but she noticed some rub marks on the wooden surrounds of the main hatch of the yacht.
And that main hatch is the entrance to the lower deck.
Yeah. And
just again, clarifying.
Yeah, exactly. That's the one that's kind of half door, half hatch. You know the kind I'm talking about, where there's a little door in the front, and then there's a hatch on top that slides back so you don't bang your head.
This is like what we were talking about in the Jim Gray episode.
Yeah, exactly. So she noticed some rub marks on that, which were kind of inconspicuous. She said they had not been there before. And the police noticed there were also fibers in the marks that appeared to be from a rope. And also, I don't know if they noticed this because there was an empty bracket, or Sue pointed it out, but the boat's fire extinguisher was missing as well. And it was apparently a very large, heavy model fire extinguisher. It was gone.
Okay.
Yeah, and so also checking for evidence around and stuff, the police looked at the dinghy. They checked it with luminol. Luminol, you spray that on it, and blood activates it and makes it glow under a black light. And of course, just as a lot of defendants and Sue have pointed out, other things besides blood can activate luminol and make it glow. So, but apparently they sprayed some luminol on the bottom of the dinghy, and a lot of it glowed.
Lit up like a rave?
Yeah, kind of.
Sorry, maybe I'm confused. So two guys, unnamed, find the dinghy. They get in the dinghy?
No, they just said that the guy that found it secured it, and I don't know if that means he just tied it to something or if that means he drug it up.
For some reason,
I
thought they hopped in it.
No.
Took the dinghy out.
So I was like,
I think he just saw it, secured it, and then they went out on his boat.
Okay, and then they board the Four Winds, and apparently don't disrupt the crime scene?
Well, and that's another thing. That's, as far as I know, they did board it. At least in one account I've heard they boarded it, and one of those was actually a court account. So I would presume it's probably accurate. Mm-hmm. But then in other accounts I've heard that they actually just looked and they yelled and nobody seemed to be home, and then they called police maybe from a cell phone and they're over in the boat.
Okay.
So maybe they didn't actually board it. Maybe they just pulled alongside and called the police.
Okay. And to go back to your statement about luminol.
Yeah.
The other things. Are they other things that might naturally be in a dinghy that would?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
That would light up a luminol.
But apparently, I can't remember. I checked out the Wikipedia page about it, and there's a lot of different substances. I think that anything that has iron in it, for example, like blood.